Today, I think we've got to be more vigilant than ever. And I think going through this article today, it definitely makes a lot of sense that we need to be more vigilant than ever. That, as the article says today, that we don't sleepwalk straight into authoritarianism. And that's where I worry that we're heading. I think this was really what was Brexit, one part of the things that Brexit was all about, to institute a very far right coup in this country. And this again comes from the London Economic. Title of the article is Sleepwalking Towards Authoritarianism. In an article on this website on the 30th of October 2015, Dominic Cummings reflected on the failure of our political elite to make acute political predictions and solve social problems. In it, he said this: the processes for selecting, educating, and training are those at the apex of politics and are between inadequate and disastrous. The political institutions suffer from problems that they very well know, but are very hard to fix. They are entangled virtuous circles that cause repeated predictable failure. A. The people at the apex of political power, elected and unelected, are far from the best people in the world in terms of goals, intelligence, ethics, or competence. B. Their education and training is such that almost nobody has the skills needed to cope with the complexity they face or even to understand the tools that might help them. Political experts are usually hopeless at predictions and are routinely repeated the same errors without being forced to learn. While our ancestor chiefs understood bows, horses, and agriculture, our contemporary chiefs and those in the media responsible for scrutiny of decisions generally do not understand their equivalents and are often less experienced in managing complex organizations than their predecessors. C. Government institutions, both national and international, which they operate and which select people for senior positions, tend to have reliably poor performance compared to what we know humans are capable of doing. Westminster and Whitehall train people to fail, predictably and repeatedly. The EU and the UN do not have the effectiveness or legitimacy we need for international cooperation. That's the end of his quote. In the UK, the pillars that uphold the workings of civil society, the state-funded judiciary, the international organisations, legislature and media are under threat from the other state pillar, the executive, who are telling people that these institutions need to be stripped down or removed. We are sleepwalking towards authoritarianism. According to the Hunter Society audit of political engagement, the UK public is increasingly disenchanted with MPs and government and ever more willing to welcome an idea of an authoritarian leader who would ignore Parliament. The study found that when people were asked whether Britain needs a strong ruler willing to break the rules, 54% agreed and only 23% said no. In all, 42% of the respondents agreed with the idea that many national problems could be dealt with more effectively if government did not have to worry so much about votes in Parliament. This is indeed a worrying trend. For the public to state a preference for a strong leader or authoritarian government willing to break the rules, or thinking that the government should be able to tackle the country's problems without worrying about the approval of Parliament, shows how large sections of the populations appear to be sliding towards brainwashed manipulation against the tenets of democracy that, despite their flaws, serve us well. We now have a government that appears to be working under the pretense of a disruption theory that is led by Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson's Rasputin, who would be better served giving lectures about disruption rather than serving as an unelected government representative who is ideologically driven to whack our institutions. To achieve political disruption, an establishment institutional victim is found and is repeatedly bullied, but the projection psychology is deployed to make the bullying sound like a noble path where the institution is portrayed as the bully and the people are the victims. The objective is a power grab of increased authoritarianism. When people do not trust traditional political systems, they look elsewhere. That's when support for destructive political extremes grows and society sleepwalks from disruption towards authoritarianism. Under the guidance of Cummings, these applications have spread across the EU. Parliamentary sovereignty, the civil service, the judiciary, and the BBC. They are all softened up by repeatedly challenging, undermining, and weakening the target institution through the media to the point where the public attitude to the institution changes. The message is wrapped around democracy, independence and nationhood, sovereignty, and making our own laws and decisions to, quote, take back control. But paradoxically, the perpetrators of this disruption are not giving control back to the people they serve, but are instead tricking people into giving it away to the control the people who they claim to serve them. Tragically, these cloak and dagger tactics are working. Take back control with lies about the European Union, the National Health Service, and Turkey's EU membership created the outcome for Brexit. Members of our gold standard rule of law under the judiciary have been undermined as enemies of the people. MPs, including expelled senior members of the Tory party who tried to prevent a no-deal Brexit, were targeted as saboteurs or unpatriotic. The BBC are constantly referred to as part of the metropolitan liberal elite. Cummings is proving that disruptive stories and lies allied to Machiavellian cunning and upending constitution by framing our institutions as out of touch and elite could be much more populist than reason and fact. He's deploying all the techniques that have worked for him during the EU referendum: disruption, depiction and duplicity, intimidation, witch hunting, populist sloganeering, and then applying them to a new set of targets. What is clear is whether Dominic Cummings' boss, Boris Johnson, actually buys into this disruption ideology. Johnson doesn't appear to enjoy conflict. He wants power accompanied by confetti, flowers, and applause. The only ideology where he buys into this ideology of winning a popularity contest for himself. The love of government-led disruption against the establishment institutions runs the risk of becoming a disruptive force. It becomes harmful for society. The foundations of civil and protected society are replaced with rubble. It risks becoming nothing more than the emperor's new clothes theory. History has taught us that when you disrupt and destroy the machinery that has served civil society so well and replace it with something much worse, it turns into something that becomes repugnant and with disastrous consequences, and we ignore the lessons of history at our own peril. And that's completely true here. I really do worry. You've obviously seen Mark Sidwell walk out this week and has been replaced with a Brexiteer. Boris's stated reason of this is that he wants someone who is ideologically aligned with him. And thus, Boris and Cummings have now succeeded in what was used to be, again, one of the golden unwritten rules is that you do not politicise the civil service, because these civil servants have to work under any government that may come into power. You get problems where, what if, let's say Boris loses the next election, and the guy in charge now is this Brexiteer and doesn't like the direction, or thinks that the new government is getting too cosy with the EU. He could undermine everything that current government is doing from the inside. This is why you shouldn't do it, because it should shock you regardless of whether you are a Brexiteer or a Remainer on this one, or should we say rejoiner in this. This is something that we just shouldn't do. This is an undermining of a democratic institution that is desperately needed, and I worry that the absolute damage that Cummings and Johnson are going to do, especially with their massive majority that they have. This is really worrying, because one of the things I really worry about is that their true agenda is going to start next year. Currently, we're being fed the carrot. As of yesterday, we had that big, the infrastructure revolution, which is hardly anything such, and accounts to, putting wallpaper over the cracks to try and hide it. It may be nice wallpaper, but the crack's still there. Austerity hasn't ended. And as we've said now, public spending on public services over the years is just going to get worse because, again, they're not spending the money. That's where the problems really lie in our society. And unless the government is willing to admit that, or we elect people that can actually go in and change that, and I think the only party that actually can at the moment is Labour, that's the only recourse we've got. And we've got to be careful. And as the first thing that someone has to do as soon as they get in is undo everything Cummings has done to our civil service and to these institutions. Because replacing them with something that's even worse would just lead to even more and further disaster.